Ladies and gentlemen, we live in turbulent times. The world is facing unprecedented challenges one after the other. The COVID-19 pandemic, the energy crisis, and the Russian war in Ukraine. The world is changing around us and we need to adapt. In Ukraine, the effects of the war are devastating. Tens of thousands of people have died already and the destruction continues. This war must end. The European Union remains an anchor of peace, stability and prosperity for the region around us. The application of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia for EU membership, in addition to the ongoing processes with the Western Balkans, is a proof of it. The enlargement of the EU has become a geopolitical priority and we need to accelerate the integration of our partners to the EU and make it a reality. We are working on two tracks to achieve this. First, we have adopted a new enlargement methodology to make the process more credible, predictable, dynamic, and give it more political steer. We have also made the focus on the rule of law stronger and confirmed that the process remains merit-based. There is no progress without delivery. The Copenhagen criteria remain valid for the Western Balkans and for the Eastern partners as well. The other track is to help our partners deliver. For the Western Balkans, we have developed an economic and investment plan, which is a 30 billion euros investment package that is 1/3 of the GDP of the region. We have already started implementing this plan with approving 21 projects for a value of 3.2 billion euros in February this year. We are building transport, energy and digital infrastructure to connect our economies and to bring prosperity to the region never seen before. We are building market economies for the region that will be competitive in the internal market. We also support the reinforcement of democratic institutions based on EU standards and the modernization of the public administrations as the basic pillars of a successful democratic market economies. Our work has results. The opening of the accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia this July is the latest and the strongest example that together we can deliver. The Western Balkans are part of Europe, geographically, economically and culturally. They need to be part of the EU without undue delays. This is our common interest. In the Eastern Partnership region, the enlargement concerns 3 countries now. For Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, we are completing the analysis of their membership applications. We will also start monitoring their progress to fulfill conditions set by the Council linked to their candidate and potential candidate statuses. We have also developed an economic and investment plan of 17 billion euros for our Eastern partners. This also benefits Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we are supporting the democratic opposition in Belarus, while our relations with the government are frozen since the stolen elections in 2020. For Ukraine, we are providing special support to face the war, and we are preparing to participate in the reconstruction efforts together with the international partners. Since the beginning of the Russian war, the EU has provided around 9.5 billion euros in financial support to help the Ukrainian government run the country, provide humanitarian aid to suffering people, support reconstruction, and provide temporary infrastructure, countering hybrid threats and military aid. Granting candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova, and potentially to Georgia, is a political commitment and a very strong message towards the region that they are welcome in the EU. But there are no shortcuts. All candidates need to fulfill the conditions for membership and follow the established road before they can cross the bridge. I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for showing your interest for this panel discussion. I wish to welcome again the panelists who joined us here today. I would also like to welcome the panelists, the 2 panelists who are online joining us, Mr. Manuel Sarrazin and Nikola Dimitrov, and to welcome again Senada Šelo Šabić, Mr. Péter Balázs and Ivan Krastev. We are discussing a topic which is an old topic, but in a somewhat new package. As we concluded in discussion with the panelists just a few minutes before we started, some of us, we know each other very well because we are touring with discussing the accession of the Balkans and the enlargement of the EU for many, many years together. We are trying to develop new ideas. We are trying to communicate messages. We are trying to advocate to foster this process in the right direction. Today's panelist topic is defined as EU expansion, the Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership. What is the right way forward? How I see, however, this discussion, that it is, in my mind, as much important to discuss the role of the European Union in this new geopolitical momentum, its role vis-à-vis its neighbors, as much it is important to discuss how these regions should develop and what is their way forward into the European membership and with regard to their EU aspirations. There is a lot to say about analysis on where we stand and what went wrong and what is not functioning and what is the most painful for whom in this process. However, I hope that we can also find some ways to really look forward and to use this momentum, which is an unhappy momentum, a wake-up call of Europe, as it was also stated in the previous panel, and what's being repeated in many discussions nowadays due to Russia's aggression and war against Ukraine. We found ourselves in a situation which has to define the realities in a different way, and which at the same time opens up opportunities and forces us into new ways of thinking and acting. So that is what I hope, that we can also find new ways of thinking about the enlargement to the Western Balkans and to the Eastern Partnership countries in a new way, in a different way, and eventually come up with 1-2 messages which could be then carried forward from here today into some other discussions and other processes. First, I would like to ask Senada Šelo Šabić to share with us her ideas. Maybe she was provoked by the opening speech. Maybe she has some other crucial messages, what she would tell us in her opening remarks. Senada.
Thank you, Hedvig. Warm regards to everybody and thank you for the invitation. Before I start, I also would like to say congratulations to Mayor Karačoj for his excellent opening speech this morning. Yes, I would like to reflect on what Commissioner Várhelyi, what we heard from Commissioner Várhelyi regarding the prospects of further enlargement in the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership countries. I think we need also, we may not discuss today, but we need to remember that Turkey is still a candidate country, and we don't discuss Turkey in this context, almost not at all, but we need to realize that we still have to decide whether Turkey is going to continue to be a candidate country or negotiating country or not. It's suspended for the time being, but the final decision is not taken yet, and the EU has to have a constructive relationship with Turkey. We cannot disregard our relationship with Turkey, especially in the current geopolitical context. With respect to the Western Balkans, on which I will focus, I would like to underline a fact that what I heard, or how I understood Commissioner Várhelyi, is that as if devoid of our current reality, we still hear from the Commission the narrative that as if everything is okay and that we can continue as we used to. And I think that we need to wake up far more quickly and far more honestly to the world in which we live. And that is the fact that we have war in Europe. Without the war, we maybe could have continued with the same narrative of the, what did he say, the changed methodology or the improved methodology and the focus on the rule of law and the investment package and so on. These are all fine things, but I don't think they are going to change the, that are going to resolve the issue of security that we are facing. So my proposal would be to consider the Balkans as a security issue primarily. I mean, we can, and yes, the EU is a provider in the framework of security, but we need strong NATO presence also, especially in few points in the Balkans that we can discuss later on. And that the whole issue of enlargement, apart from the democratic elements that we discussed in the previous panel this morning, has to have this element of security, because Russian presence and possibility of Russian or other actors, non-European actors, interventions in this region are more feasible now than they were at the beginning of 2022. All this, and I will finish with this, this discussion of the enlargement is taking place in the broader context or in multipolarity of issues that the European Union is facing. And that is apart from the war invasion of Ukraine that I mentioned, the inflation and energy crisis. It's also the internal EU reform that is not settled and is not resolved. And cannot, simply these two things are going in parallel. The enlargement is part of the internal European reform. How the EU is going to look like with the current members, and if we add more members, can it be sustainable to have this sort of veto politics and so on? And then in parallel to all of this, at the same time, global issues, the relationship with China, the climate challenges, migration, and so on. So I think we need to, as Europeans or taking care of our continent or our part of the world, we need to be more realistic and more determined to know the borderlands, so to speak, to know the framework within which we act, rather than to continue having these nice declarative visions, but without real commitment to what we are able to do in case of crises that are just piling up in front of us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manuel Sarrazin, the German government's special envoy to the Western Balkans, you been frequently visiting the region in the past months, meeting your counterparts, participating in different discussions. Do you see, I mean, what are your takeaways, first of all, from the region in this new context, in this new situation? And how do you see now this shift in discussions about enlargement?
Yes, first, I want to thank you, of course, for the invitation. Sorry, I can't be in Budapest. It's a miracle I'm at home tonight and have some duties also sometimes here. So great to be online with you. And you know that usually I'm talking the boring stuff. And I think that to a certain extent, the boring stuff is still working and it's necessary. It's perhaps also the baseline or the grounding for talking about other ideas, more creative stuff. But the boring stuff, which is still the enlargement promise and the conviction that the European Union wants the region inside the European Union, is decisive. So I would say it's really the one point which has to be made. The second point is that I'm convinced, you know, I'm a believer regarding the European Union in the old Schuman attitude, which was saying there's not one great plan or one great design which will make the European Union. No, it's the solidarity of the action, which means first, I'm really convinced that the European Union has to start again delivering, and every single small progress will step by step build up a new picture of us in ability of welcoming and also transforming the countries. Second, it is of course important to say that solidarity of action will be especially necessary this winter. When we saw that in the COVID pandemics, Western Balkans failed themselves, perhaps they also have been not at the first or second level of focus of the European Union. So this old rule of solidarity of action will be in these times regarding energy, perhaps also regarding food, decisive. Also that we see that it's not only third actors getting to the region, but also other models are pushing us. So regarding the other models, first there's this old fight between community method and open Balkans, I would funnily say. I think it's good to have a concurrence in that sense. I believe that an inclusive approach of all six is the right one. But instead of like talking better about the others, I think it's our task now to bring results again. And we are really convinced that the summit in Berlin of the Berlin process on 3rd of November, for which Chancellor Scholz is inviting, can deliver a leap forward regarding energy security, energy solidarity, and green agenda, but also a leap forward for the regional, for the common regional markets. And I'm quite sure that this is a kind of a magic moment where everybody who's trying to do positive things can contribute also to the processes others are doing, instead of stalling ourselves in debates and trenches, fighting against models, against each other without doing anything, only talking about the one model is the bad one, this model will only lead to what? No, let's just work on it. And the third is that in all these months of traveling the region, I unfortunately have the clear sense, which might be also valid for Germany, US, France, so not only for the region, but also in the region, that the region knows better what war means, but I think it has no idea what this war means for them. Even the Ukrainian EU application inherited status, which for me is a really positive signal for the region, because it's bringing back EU enlargement, as Hedvig said, as a geopolitical instrument of the European Union, a kind of comeback of the most powerful geopolitical instrument which the European Union had in the last 50 years. So it's positive for the region, but somehow the region is not taking this contest right. And I think the region is still, kind of not having a clear take on, is this our war? And what are the geopolitical and also regarding geopolitical economics consequences out of it? And I'm really convinced that a lot of this old boring stuff must be the base, which doesn't mean that new creative ideas also for bringing credibility in better involving the Western Balkan states earlier than full membership, like all this positive stuff we can talk about, but the framework must be clear. The old boring stuff, full membership, believing in a new enlargement, Thessaloniki promise, all this stuff is still necessary. Without this, nothing else will fly, but we shouldn't put it like in a contraposition.
Thank you very much. Very interesting points, and I would definitely like to come back to some of what you said in the next round, as we promised that there would be a next round with questions, follow-up questions to each of the panelists. But first, we continue with this first round, and I would like to ask Mr. Péter Balázs, who has a truly extensive experience when it comes to European developments. Maybe an opening question, but you are of course free to shape your address as you wish. However, I would be very much interested also to hear from you some ideas on actually what Europe do we wish for when we discuss these topics in the future, how that Europe should look like.
Thank you very much for the starting question. I think that in that respect, I would share the new views of Chancellor Scholz, a much larger Europe with 36 or even 40 members. And I would like to comment that. I paid a big attention to the words of the EU Commissioner, Várhelyi, who suggested a dynamic and credible enlargement process. Enlargement in the last decades was everything but dynamic and credible. Partly we can understand the reluctance of the member states because of some negative experience with newcomers like Hungary and Poland not following all the requirements and their own obligations, or the fact that the EU with the last enlargements has grown beyond the critical size of an organization, which made governance and decision-making much more complicated. Or we can witness a growing gap between the EU requirements and the adaptation capacities of the candidates. Just imagine or put side by side the growing acquis communautaire and the capacities of Kosovo or Moldavia. Yeah, or Montenegro. Yeah, so we know the facts. Senada has mentioned Turkey. Turkey is not on the list of Chancellor Scholz. However, this country applied for EU membership 35 years ago. This is the forgotten fiancé, because we have did something, but not according to the wishes of the partner. Then comes the Western Balkans. Almost 20 years ago, the famous Saloniki summit took place. I had the privilege to be there in 2003 when the whole Western Balkans got a European perspective. How many countries joined since that? One single, Croatia. All the others are somewhere in the pipeline. And we have got the Eastern Partnership, and interestingly enough, this latecomer partner has dynamized the whole thing because of the very sad fact of the war in Ukraine. And now something is moving. We have mentioned the speech of Scholz, which is really a turn in German foreign policy. And also French President Macron has promoted an idea about a political community, which could be a good device, framing whole Europe in parallel with the accession process, not instead. So no replacement, no substitute, but a helping device. And let me refer back to our experience with the EU accession. When we recall that time, it was exactly 1 decade from application until accession for Hungary and Poland, and for the others even shorter, because they applied a bit later than the two pioneers. And we were extremely impatient during those years. We urged the process every day. Looking back, we can say that we were happy guys, because we had 3 very positive factors with us. One was our own engagement. There was a very large support, almost full support in our countries for EU membership. Second, the EU was fully open to receive new members. And third, there was no third big power opposing our accession or opposing EU enlargement. Now, compare those conditions with the actual situation. Are people fully engaged for EU membership in all the countries? I have seen it myself in Serbia and in some other countries, question mark. Second, is the EU open? Now it is half opening the way, but we'll see the follow-up. And there are third powers which are not in favor of that process. First of all, Russia, in the Eastern Partnership region, but also in Serbia and Montenegro, then China, by quite different methods, and Turkey is also there in the Balkans. So let's be realistic and let's deal the issue, not repeating the last enlargement round, which is a typical failure of EU administration, just thinking that everything is the same and we have to turn the machine in the same way. But let's analyze the situation and let's take action.
Thank you so much. This gives me many entry points to continue with Nikola Dimitrov, the former Foreign Minister of North Macedonia, a dear friend and one of my partners in touring with this topic all around Europe recently. It's as it was just mentioned, there are external actors which are kind of trying to make this process more complicated, but I believe that at least from North Macedonia's perspective, we can say that some of the EU member states or the EU itself manages to put even more efficient obstacles on the road, unfortunately. So that is one of the issues which I find very problematic and controversial. Nikola, as you say sometimes, North Macedonia is one of the veterans of, or the veteran of the EU enlargement. Sometimes you even quote Gerald Knaus, who says that the EU enlargement to the Balkans is like a bus without leaves, without wheels. So yeah, I mean, a part of sharing frustrations, how do you see now this new situation where there is an opening even for Northern Macedonia, even though in complicated circumstances? How do you see the next period? What could it bring if we try to be positive about it?
Thank you, Hedvig, for this starting question. I'm thrilled to be part of the second Budapest Forum, so very grateful for the invitation to the mayor. If somewhat intimidated and humbled by you as moderator and the fellow panelists. So I'm gonna briefly try to take a middle road between facing reality. I think we have to be realistic if we want to make real progress. And I will try to sort of resonate what Manuel tried to do, which is stay positive, believe that good things are possible, even miracles sometimes. So on the side of the reality, I think we all heard what Commissioner Várhelyi had to say, talking about the new methodology, which is now 2 years old, something like that. Make the process more credible, more predictable, dynamic, merit-based. We don't really have a credible process at the moment. Some of the more striking examples for that is, for instance, visa liberalization for Kosovo. And I am joining online from a hotel room in Pristina as I speak now. So this is obviously an overwhelming topic for the citizens who cannot really visit the European Union without visas. The process is not predictable, and the process is not really merit-based. We have to record Croatia, who had the longest accession process in the history of enlargement, 68 months. Now, both Montenegro and Serbia are well ahead. Montenegro over 10 years, Serbia over 8 years in the process, and they have managed to close 3 and 2 chapters respectively. Now, if you compare the preparedness to join, after all of those years of accession talks and reform efforts. Albania and North Macedonia are actually not really behind, even though they just started the talks in July. So we have to make an effort to restore merit in the process. If there is backsliding, we have to talk about it, we have to name and shame. If there is progress, we have to reward it. Otherwise, we will not be able to use it as a tool to transform the societies in the Western Balkans. So I talked about the length, about the months. Obviously, the process is not dynamic. Chancellor Scholz, who is obviously interested in the European future of the region, and we very much welcome that, in Prague said that enlargement must happen, but for new members to join, the decision-making should be reformed on the inside in terms of departing from the unanimity rule. And I think if we are not clear that actual membership is possible in the midterm for any of the countries in the region, we have to come up with interim and more timely incentives. Access to cohesion funds, sit at the table, invite. We are talking about the energy crisis these days. Why don't we invite the energy ministers of the region to take part at one of the sessions of the Energy Council of the European Union, or the Agri Council as well? So I think we have to think of ways to make this process more meaningful. I think we have to try to make a positive dynamic with now Ukraine and Moldova also as candidates. The Western Balkans 6 are a region that is encircled by EU member states, promised membership as back as Zagreb 2000 and Thessaloniki 2003. Next year, we will mark 2 decades since the Thessaloniki promise. And Ukraine and Moldova have an advantage of enthusiasm. They just got the commitment a few months ago. I think if we fail in the region, it is very difficult to see how we will win with Ukraine and Moldova. So I think we are all in this together, the EU, the Western Balkans, and the countries of the Eastern Partnership. I also endorse the call for action. We live in confrontational geopolitical times. We have to consolidate the continent. Putin just announced, as we all know, partial mobilization. He mentioned nuclear threats again, etc. So in some ways, both on the EU side, from our region, the Eastern Partnership, we need to come up with a common vision for our continent in the years to come. And this includes tackling problems on the inside. This includes us in the Balkans rising to the opportunity, trying to solve our issues, pushing our democracies from within to make them stronger. And there is an opportunity, but for us to seize it, we have to be honest about the deficiencies. And among those, I have to mention the individual vetoes. If enlargement is a strategic goal, countries should not easily misuse or abuse the whole process because of issues that are not really related to the Copenhagen criteria. And in some ways, this sad story of the Macedonian-Bulgarian relationship and issues, in a way, works against both countries. Instead of focusing on the real problem of corruption and cronyism and partocracy, which is a problem both for North Macedonia and Sofia, we are essentially using issues of identity and history as a distraction from the real problems. So I think we have to grow up fast in our region, both member states and candidate countries, face real problems. And I think we deserve honesty from our friends like Manuel and our friends in Paris. We need to make this work. And please, in these months to come, deliver on the visa liberalization promise for Kosovo. I think they deserve it, and the region needs some tangible progress. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Nikola. There will be opportunities to continue with some of the specific topics. I believe that somehow this new situation with granting candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova is also showing how much there is no positive narrative about the enlargement to the Balkans. It is basically the fact the promise was given back in 2003, as you mentioned as well, so we have to fulfill it. But no one can come up with any positive narrative about why it would be important for the EU. And it also shows, unless there is no major crisis, the attention is not really there, and even the process gets endlessly complicated and long, as both you and Nikola mentioned. So, Ivan, how to look at this from another perspective, because you are well known from having interesting perspectives on issues.
Thank you very much. And I much more want to continue where most of the colleagues have been. From time to time, our talk on the enlargement is as convincing as Russians talk on a special operation. The situation on the ground has changed dramatically. We continue to talk as if nothing has happened. And I'm just going to give you the change I see it, and why probably also changing the discourse is not going to hurt us. There was several preconditions on which all this exercise was based. And part of it was what you have in the Western Balkans is a kind of a field of frozen solutions. You know that these countries are going to end up one day in the EU, you don't know when. But not simply that you don't know when, but you also don't care very much when. Because there is a waiting room. These countries have their own problems, absolutely real problems, which could not be attributed to Brussels. But they can stay comfortably in the waiting room, and in the waiting room, you can do different things. You can deliver some drinks. You basically can make the life in the waiting room much nicer than otherwise it could be. And then the partnership was much more perceived as the area in which you have not frozen solutions, but frozen conflicts. And the idea was how basically to act in order not to go in a situation which is going to unfreeze them. All this has changed, and the first is the time dimension. There is no waiting room. It becomes an emergency room on all levels. There is an illusion to believe that there is a very strong pro-European sentiments in all of the countries in the Western Balkans. People like to go on the opinion polls, and some of the opinion polls are better than others. But in a certain way, what we are seeing is also the war in Ukraine is very polarizing for the societies. And what basically Mr. Balázs said, go to Serbia, go to opinion polls, it is a divided country. It is a divided country. By the way, countries like Bulgaria are divided, countries like Hungary are divided. So it's not something which is specific, but certain things that were taken for granted are not there yet. And this is not only there. Go to Bosnia, where these divisions is also institutionalized in a kind of a specific way. And as a result of it, we are basically facing a situation in which we are not talking now so much about enlargement in terms of transformation and creating of a common market. We are talking about consolidation of the Western sphere of influence in Eurasia. And it's a totally different job. And honestly, it's not only about common market anymore. It's very much creating a continental scale war economy in a situation in which basically European Union is very much shifting from efficiency basically to resilience, and this can be seen critically in the energy policies. And this is critical because if this is the case, the questions that we're asking are very different, and from this point of view, I do believe both President Macron and Chancellor Scholz, they have a point. In a certain way, you are going to push these countries not simply to opening and closing chapters. By the way, can you imagine how the negotiations with Ukraine go the traditional way? When we're negotiating agricultural policies, on which territory? On the constitutional territory of Ukraine? or on the territory that Ukrainian forces are controlling now. I'm saying all this because beyond the rhetoric that we like so much, there's certain facts that are not badly to be faced, because this is going to create a certain credibility when we talk to the people. In a certain way, Ukraine is part of this political community. And if you don't believe me, you can read basically President Putin's speech from the morning, in which he said that he's not in a war with Ukraine, but he's in a war with the collective West. And basically, this is the Western weapons. Basically, this is the platform for the West. There is one thing that is worse being in a war, and this is being in a war and not noticing it. Because in economic terms, we're talking about totally different reality. And as a result of it, then the question comes, for example, what you're offering countries like Serbia, which is really divided, to basically convince President Vučić and his government that not simply joining the Western sanctions, which is a not easy political move for him, let's face it, but also having a totally different view of lithium production in Serbia is going to be different. Talking basically to Kosovars and trying to negotiate why keeping the conflict with Serbia on the level of the intensity that you have now is becoming a security problem also for Europe, exactly because there are third parties that can utilize it. And I'm even not mentioning Bosnia. And when you go to Ukraine, and we're talking about money and so on, Ukraine cannot be sustained without the constant flow of European money and European weapons. This is the reality. And if we want basically really to help Ukraine sustain, we should face it. Between 5 and 7 billion per month is just the money that the West is providing in order to have Ukrainian society and institutions functioning. I'm not touching on the military deliveries at all. This is outside of any military deliveries. And this is going to be for a long period of time. And then you're ending up with a situation in which 300 people have been mobilized in Russia. This is a next level, and this is much more escalating in the moment in which there are going to be tensions within our own societies. There are going to be tensions between different societies. So as a result of it, how you are consolidating your geopolitical space is the problem that we're facing. And here it's very different with different countries. Of course, it's easy to consolidate Albania than Serbia when basically Russia is the problem, but it is probably not going to be so easy if you're also going to have tensions with Turkey. So this is a job, and I do believe that the problem is that Commission, my view, understanding the situation perfectly well, does not have the language and the instruments to do it. And here comes to the member states. This is not simply opening and closing chapters. This is not just doing this and that. In the way basically we're reforming electricity market and so on, trying to understand that we're in a totally different situation. In my view, this should happen also in the relations to these countries. So as a result of it, the agenda is different. And this is why just going and claiming that we're simply in enlargement talks and we're going to do it better and we're going to strengthen the bureaucratic process, as I told you, for me, it's slightly really basically the President Putin's talk that he's in a special operation and basically everything goes in the way it should have to go, when people know that probably it's not exactly how it looks like.
Thank you, Ivan. So if we consider this as now a momentum where we have to kind of realize that this process should be a geopolitical and geostrategic process, Mr. Sarrazin, at the same time, we have a strictly designed enlargement process, which is much about, as Ivan said, opening, closing chapters, which got very complex over the years, very long lasting. Ivan mentioned, of course, that with such a process, it is basically impossible to start actually accession negotiations with Ukraine, which is at war right now, and who knows what the outcomes of this war will be. But this process also doesn't allow, for example, candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina still. So there are many controversial issues around it. So again, repeating, if it's a geopolitical and geostrategic process consolidating, the European territory and building up European security and autonomy in the next phase, how these two can be kind of synchronized, whether this process, the enlargement process, can survive in its original shape as it is today.
Well, I really like the input of Ivan, but I have to, perhaps also for the debate, make a real opposite position. As more political the process becomes, as more veto situations you will have. As more geostrategic you want it to be, as more you should let the technocrats do it without political intervention. So I have a clear opposite opinion. And I think the bureaucracy, the strongest in the next years of negotiations, will be the Ukrainian. The Ukrainian bureaucracy marvelously showed how they are able to literally fight over the day and write European papers in the night. I'm not handling Ukraine, by the way, but I wouldn't underestimate it. Still, the magic of the technocratic stuff is there. I think what's lacking in the Western Balkans is the other part, the society part, the communication part, the believing part. We were too technocratic, and not in that sense, we were not enough technocratic by having this vetoes, this bilateralization of some issues, which is, at least in the pure sense of the idea, not that the Commission usually does. And I usually now say, like, when we decided to have a Commission-driven enlargement process, this was in the 70s, after de Gaulle second time blocked the enlargement with UK. So in the Western Balkans, I think, you know, the classical idea of Copenhagen was first we change the mindsets, the institutions of societies with Western laws and Coca-Cola, and then the acquis comes next. And in the Western Balkans, we changed it, nothing came next. And now we are coming with the old story to a certain extent. I still believe the old story is not wrong. It can be more sexy, it must be more attractive, and I think delivering is the first step to become one. It's a bit like, you know, the old husband, you know, after 20 years he says, I finally want to marry you. And he's a bit not in a shape like he was 20 years ago. And then you say, okay, what you're going to do, you have to be more fit. He says, like, yeah, I will search for a great new gym and build it completely new without animosity, and everything will be fine. And then it will be great. And I think it's better to, darling, I already was in the gym yesterday. Okay, only for 10 minutes, but at least I start. So I think it doesn't mean to be a this or that, or yes or no. Like Olaf Scholz said, an enlarged European Union should be rid of animosity. But he didn't say we only enlarge if we get it done before. I think this is the right approach. Second point, the price of Ukrainian war. I hear this quite often. And I think it's marvelous what Western unity is able to do there. On the other hand, I also have, as a private opinion, the feeling that we have no idea what is the price if we don't pay this. And for example, when I heard the first time the number of what the British budget is paying to North Ireland, post-conflict situation. So how much money we are willing to pay to solve conflicts, it is clear that supporting Ukraine now is also a kind of, you know, letting the conflict not breaking out in our direct neighborhood more. So the geopolitical point is back, as it was always in the region, but not seen perhaps obviously. I mean, imagine how important Greece is now in the Western Balkans, since, for example, Nikola was having some work and efforts on, you know, changing also the attitude. Imagine that 7 years ago we were talking of getting Greece out of the European Union, actually, in reality, because of money questions, because of numbers, yeah, because of 100 billion euros debt, yeah, some credits. Imagine how the geopolitical situation would be today in that region, also in the Eastern Mediterranean, if this political position wasn't stopped by also geopolitical assessment in the Euro crisis. But we will not be geopolitically successful if we are not trying to also transform the societies with the old thing of chapters opening and closing. I've seen too often that it can magically work in bringing the power situation between reformists and the not reformists in a country in another shape if European Union is good and clear on it. And of course, this means also European Union has to be good and clear on that. And I can understand when the impression is that in the last years, perhaps it was not our best performance always in everything. But this is why I believe we should stick to the boring stuff, then take the impetus of Ivan on top of it to become good, but not see this, as a pure controversy.
Thank you. Mr. Balázs, you mentioned at your during your opening remarks the case of Hungary and Poland. I think we all agree that the approach of fundamentals first and insisting on the rule of law and fostering rule of law and democratic processes in the countries is very important in the accession process, and it shouldn't be abandoned even if there is a geostrategic urgency with regard to fostering the integration of these countries. But at the same time, if you look at what difference this focus on fundamentals really makes during the accession process, on the example of the Western Balkans, we can almost state that it actually doesn't contribute to the necessary changes what were imagined. Even the term stabilocracy was launched a few years ago, stating that the process rather supports those who are granting stability, even with kind of semi-autocratic regimes, rather than really fostering change. So, how would you kind of reform eventually this process in order to really contribute to the necessary change on the ground?
Well, what we cannot change, this is the balance of rights and obligations. It must be very clear that, yes, there are various beneficial points in EU membership, but there are also obligations, and the two should be well balanced. Now, I have the impression, the feeling, maybe the hope, that under the new conditionality process, we can somehow better require the implementation of EU obligations. We are at the very beginning of the very first action on Hungary, unfortunately, but this is a meaningful process, and we could witness the turn in the behavior of the Hungarian government, because before there was a blunt refusal of any criticism. This was the first step, that what you say is not true first. Then the second wave usually used the argument that others are doing the same. And the third was usually another twist, saying that what's your competence in that issue? This is a sovereign issue of our country. So this was, and then quite of a sudden, under the pressure of suspending big funds, the Orban government has changed the negotiators. The former street fighters were retired, and a former commissioner was delegated to Brussels, who is not pretending things like all this is because of LGBTQ issues or gender problems. He is, Navracic is talking about the real things and making real promises. Now the question is that in this very short time, until the 19th of November, whether a whole system can be credibly changed, which was built during 12 years. I don't think so, but maybe some credibility can be opened, and maybe part of the money will be attributed to Hungary. Now, these are very important lessons. Otherwise, I think that I fully share the views of Ivan about the consolidation effect. This is now a consolidation project. And the good news is that 9 countries have been included into the speech of Chancellor Scholz. So it's not a one-by-one approach, but 9, the 3 on the Eastern Partnership, and then the whole rest of the Western Balkans. This is very good news. Turkey is not on the list for the time being. So there should be some thinking about Turkey as well, maybe not in that framework. And then we should completely change the methodology, because it would be really ridiculous to apply this chapter by chapter approach on Ukraine in war. We should reverse some orders, and for that purpose, the French idea of a political community is a good one, because in the traditional enlargement process, we are clarifying all the technical issues. Why? Because the political framework was given, and we could focus on the technical adaptation. And at the end of the process came the happy wedding day. No pleasure before that day. So no EU money and no attendance of the council and so on. Now let's reverse the order. Let's start with the wedding day. A political framework, a political community, and within that political community, we could deal step by step, sector by sector, with this rapprochement to EU requirements.
Thank you. It is 12 o'clock now, but I believe because we were late, like 20 minutes, we can also prolong a bit, and there will be still enough time for lunch. Is that agreed with the organizers? Well, I hope so. Yeah. So we will change, or we will finish the second round, and then eventually, if there are some urgent questions, we will try to answer them. Senada, what crisis threats there are existing in the region in these new circumstances? There were already turbulences before the war in Ukraine. There is now a completely new situation. How do you see these developments?
I will focus on Bosnia and Herzegovina, not discussing Kosovo and Montenegro and others. Maybe we can touch in a broader scheme. I would like just to underline what I hear from the discussion from all our panelists is this, I think, message that we need to think about the enlargement no longer in this also moral, not only bureaucratic autopilot exercise, but also the moral story. Like, we committed ourselves at some point, and therefore we need to fulfill the commitment. No, we don't have to do this. If we do, we have to know why, both on the EU side and both on the side of the countries who want to join. It's a mutual agreement. It's not one taking the other without his or her will. So I think the reality is forcing us, or the dynamic of changes around us is forcing us to simply become more realistic. And I think before I turn to Bosnia and Herzegovina, I really have to underline this issue about the EU paying for everything. If EU citizens are going to pay for the enlargement, they need to know why. And if the new members are going to commit to become members of the European Union, they will get benefits, but they also get obligations. And the thing that we portray the EU enlargement as one nice, happy story and happily living ever after, I think needs to be more openly and more, realistically deconstructed for the benefit of our future, not because we want to go into a sad future, but if we go into changes, and if we go into which we are facing already, I think we are privileged to sit here and, as Ivan said, forgetting that we are basically at war. Our reality may change faster than we expect, And I think the better we are prepared, the more prospects for confronting the changes that we don't want to, but may be forced to confront, will work for us rather than against us. In terms of crisis spots in the Balkans, Bosnia-Herzegovina is seriously one crisis spot. Milorad Dodik, a leader of one entity, was yesterday in Moscow, meeting with Putin in this very selected, exclusive membership of Lukashenko, Kadyrov, and Dodik. Meeting him recently. We don't know what they discussed, but you can only imagine what are the messages or what can be expected from such meetings. Does the European Union want to have a Trojan horse in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in its underbelly, in the Balkans? It's not obviously up to the Balkans to decide this, because if they could fight it, they could, I mean, collectively, but also Brussels and European capitals have to take this seriously. Do they care or do they not? Is this a threat or it is not? Can they do something about it or not? The United States, is it a partner in the EU enlargement or not? The US is promoting open Balkans concept, which is basically countering, or at least not fully aligned with the Berlin process of economic and infrastructural connectivity and cooperation in the Western Balkans. Is this the model that we are going to tolerate? Are we going to integrate it? Are we going to confront it? Do we have something else to offer? Is it going to prevail, this open Balkan concept? I don't know, but this is a question for people in Brussels. And not going into all the details of the Bosnia-Herzegovina, of the issue of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Hedvig, you said Bosnia cannot and does not qualify for candidacy status. It can't with the Dayton peace agreement. This peace agreement is stifling the country. Our question is, how do we dismantle Dayton peace agreement but preserve peace in Bosnia-Herzegovina? This is a challenge for us, not only for the citizens of Bosnia-Herzegovina, because a war in Bosnia or conflict could affect and will affect the rest of its neighborhood. So these are serious issues that are maybe minor in the framework of larger issues that we are confronting, but we should not forget that even when we have, a small thing that nags us and that we disregard as a small injury, if it infects and if it, poisons our blood, it can suffer from it terribly. I think we need to pay attention while we still can.
Thank you, Ivan. Is it now that then we kind of think in crisis mode? You said there is now an emergency room. So we look at consolidating these regions because there is such an emergency, or do we still also have to look into what is the added value of these regions to the EU? What value would be added to the EU by integrating these regions? And do we need maybe a kind of a new mental map for Europe in order to develop these ideas?
Well, listen, one does not go against the other. In a certain way, what can simply totally changes the context in which all this functions. And my feeling is the following. The idea was, and this is what society were telling also themselves in the Western Balkans, we don't have a choice. No, society has a choice. And the problem is that this choice is going to be made in a very short period of time, even when people are not understanding that they're making choices. And it's not going to be an easy choices. From this point of view, what I like about Open Balkans is you're giving some agency to the region. The problem is that in a certain way, European Commission was treating basically the region in a way, you're basically treating a patient that all the time should be kind of under medicines in order not to feel the pain or this or that. But then you don't know where the patient is. And as a result of it, obviously, as I said, there is a major divisive things happening in the region because of this war. war is closer to the Western Balkans than people can imagine, exactly because of the fact that some of the sentiment of political leaders, but part of societies, are very much polarized because of it. So this is not a region that can simply wait and open and close chapters, because basically there is no consensus anymore what you're doing in this situation. Secondly, the relations between the East and West within the European Union is changing. Because of Ukraine, because of the situation, because of a totally existential threat that countries like Poland or the Baltic republics are taking, because of the fact that on one level, Poland is a country with a major kind of a problems with the rule of law, and on the other side, this is a country that basically is hosting most of the refugees coming from Ukraine, and you have Ukrainian refugees in 7% of the households in Poland. This is not an easy story. What I don't like in our rhetoric, we're always pretending that we basically first are choosing between good and bad. And like people like Isaiah Berlin is telling us, normally when we're choosing, we are sacrificing a value. And this is what basically the war generation knew well. And this is something that basically we're not kind of ready to face. You can go and you can go with policies. And on the other side, what is also changing dramatically is that we're talking about consolidation effect, but this consolidation effect also goes with the rise of identity politics in many places. Yes, we are all facing Russia, but this is not a reason for the Polish government not to ask for the reparation from Germany. Or it was not a reason for the Bulgarian government not to basically ask certain things from Macedonia that probably if Hegel was alive was going to say that it was not necessary. But the story is that this is the reality. And we should face this reality and act in this. For example, we're saying transformation. There is no more transformative power than war. As famous scholar Charles Steele used to say, states are making wars, but wars are making states. And when we're talking, for example, about Ukraine and people are extremely praising Ukraine, listen, Ukraine now is a really striving democracy, but believe me, this striving democracy is going to be unable to fix all the boxes of the European Union of what is a democracy. Go on the media on this, and because they're a country in a war. And in my view, this is what is the story. You're going to have a country which is in a totally different situation than others. And this kind of a diversity in the European Union. This is why, for example, I don't have any sympathy for this type of a rise of identity politics that comes and attack on the Polish government on Germany. On the other side, there are 2 or 3 issues on which Poland has a legitimate questions towards Germany, including the weapons. It's legitimate. And from this point of view, we're going to see rebalancing of power. Unlike in a previous crisis, Germany and France, but particularly in Germany, are not in as strong positions they have been before, because in all previous crises, Germany was supplier of solution. And now, because of the very strong dependency on Russian energy, Germany is one of the most vulnerable players in all this, with also difficult coalition within the country. So I do believe all this is realities. And if we're trying to ignore them and stay on the level of the declarative statements, for example, we have the same with the climate change and energy security. It is beautiful to say that basically this crisis is going to help us with the climate change, but we also should be quite open to the fact that at least on short term, it means that more coal and kind of energy security taking priority and so on. When you're telling the people that all good things go together all the time, we are losing credibility. This is my feeling. And this is a moment in which losing credibility is the worst that can happen to any government. Better tell people what they're really going to face than telling them that basically, don't worry, at the end of the day, all our priority are going to go together.
Thank you, Ivan. Nikola, your final words. Don't feel pressured, but people here are looking for having lunch after we finish. Your final words, and I have a very concrete question to you, and that is, what do you expect from the newly to be relaunched Berlin process?
Yes, which is probably for Manuel, but briefly, the hopes from the region maybe in this respect. I find Ivan always extremely inspiring, and I think we are happy as a region to have him as someone coming from our region and who is among the best thinkers in Europe we have. The attractiveness of the waiting room, even when drinks are served, after spending so long, years, is in significant decline. And I like this contrast with waiting room becoming an emergency room. I think picking up on your transformation versus consolidation, I think we have to find a way to reconcile those two, one way or the other, and you are better placed to think of that way. Otherwise, we may come at a situation where we will actually like autocrats if they're our autocrats. And then I think we're going to lose the European in the European Union. It's going to be like a fancy fraternity club where values and principles and democracy and rule of law and freedom of the media are not so important. So I think we have to find a way to, although this is not easy, and in some ways we have seen what happens in the context of enlargement in the region when you politicize a process that should be about principles and values, Copenhagen criteria. For instance, do we grant Serbia instant membership if they solve the issue with Kosovo and fully align with the CFCP on sanctions against Russia? Even if there is backsliding on freedom of the media and rule of law and independence of the judiciary. I think this is a question that helps in this dichotomy. And the other way around, when a country that is actually performing, making progress on the criteria, but cannot really be rewarded because of other unrelated issues. So it's difficult to reconcile accession, which is supposedly merit-based, with high politicization. So I think this is a huge challenge, but it starts by facing this reality that we are in a consolidation mode on the continent because of the war. But on the other hand, citizens of the region are leaving the region in search of societies governed by the rule of law and bountiful with economic opportunity. So we have to somehow make this happen in our region, which is encircled by member states. And lastly, on the Berlin process, I think it's great that the chancellor is decided to take this over, and it will continue. I think we have to use the opportunity to really push for a regional common market through the Berlin process. I think the energy crisis will be huge for the region. So this is a platform where we can find solutions at a pan-European level, at an EU level, that will be applicable for the region. Cybersecurity as well, the attack on Albania, the attack in Montenegro, there was something similar in Kosovo, is also an important issue. But it's going to be important to try to streamline regional cooperation. There is a point in what Ivan said about regional ownership, but I think we have a bit of a confusing landscape at the moment, and we need to maybe not necessarily get one process, but we need some clarity in what is possible, etc. I think this is important. So I think with Manuel, with his position, we need you and Berlin engaged, and let's all try to make the most out of this Berlin process too, that will be launched on 3rd of November. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikola, and I would like to thank you all panelists. And unless there is an urgent question which will not allow you to fall asleep tonight, and which you would ask either Manuel Sarrazin or Nikola Dimitrov, who are there online, I would like to encourage you to maybe approach the other three panelists who I suppose will be around still for lunch. So I believe we can continue this discussion with them over lunch. And now I would like to invite you then to have lunch and then to continue the program in the afternoon. Thank you for being here and to listening to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Köszönöm.